Përshëndetje zonja o zotri, mirë se po takojmë në një transmetim tjetër në Politiko, këtu në televizion e gazetarëve në kanalin 10. Unë jam Kushtrim Sadiku, do t'jem bashkë me ju gjatë minutave në vazhdim. Sot e kam të ftuar një mysafir të veçantë, një zotri që shumë dekada i ka quar dhe natyrisht edhe sot e më ditë angazhohet në mënyrë të drejtë për Kosovën dhe shqiptarët. Vjen nga Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës, është një nga ata zotrin të cilët kanë qenë të përfshirë në jetën politike në Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës në formën më direkte dhe më përkrahëse për çështjen shqiptare në Ballkan. Emri i tij është Christopher Hyland, i cili gjatë viteve 90, në fillim të vitit 90, ka qenë një nga njerëzit kryesor të ish presidentit Bill Clinton, presidenti historik për shqiptarët dhe Kosovën, i cili bëri të mundur që nëpërmjet veprimeve politike natyrisht NATO të intervenojnë në Kosovë dhe Kosova të çlirohet. Jo vetëm për këtë çështje, zoti Hyland nga ajo periudhë kohore deri më sot angazhohet që të fuqizoj subjektivitetin e Kosovës në çfarëdo forme, vjen shpesh në Kosovë dhe natyrisht është mbajtës dhe është i dekoruar edhe nga institucionet e Kosovës, sikundër që nga institucionet e Shqipërisë. Mr. Hyland, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for visiting and having an interview here with the Politiko in Channel 10.
I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be at Channel 10, which is an incredible facility.
Yeah.
And what you're doing here is remarkable.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I will start with the present, speaking about the foreign relations and foreign policy of the United States. And then in the second part, we will have an opportunity to discuss about what happened in before, during the 90s and not only the 90s. I call this interview with the title The New America. Is there a new America, Mr. Hyland?
Yes, you have chosen very wisely on your title. There is a completely new America. Ironically, the new America is predicated upon a lot of old threads in American political history and thinking. But the new America is reassessing every aspect of its foreign engagement, every aspect of its domestic structure. And the outcome will be very exciting and very interesting to see.
What has changed, speaking about the foreign policy? We can see the involvement of President Trump during the crisis in the Middle East, of course, during the war in Ukraine, with the recent developments. How do you see the perspective of foreign policy, speaking about the new mandate of President Trump?
Well, I see President Trump judiciously and wisely re-examining and rethinking every single American engagement in all aspects and in all areas of the world, whether it's Ukraine, which we clearly see a reorientation in attitude and policy, the Middle East, in Gaza, Israel, and in the Balkans. Everything is up for re-examination. Ironically, in my personal opinion, due to the pragmatic, no-nonsense nature of President Trump, I think it is the best for the Balkans in the long run. Ironically, although there seems to be trepidation and some fear within various Balkan communities, President Trump's effort to review, re-examine, and in the end, in my opinion, pragmatically move towards a more sustainable and realistic future in the Balkans will prevail.
Yeah, I'll come back for the Balkans issues, because there are a lot of issues, as you know. I want to talk about the relationship between United States and Russia. We all saw the recent developments in the White House and the Oval Office when President Trump and President Zelensky had the heated debate there, and we can see the progress and the approach of Mr. Trump. He wants to make a peace with Russia, and he wants to have a new beginning with Russia. How do you see that kind of relationship? Can you see United States and Russia being in one side? And how did you assess the developments in the Oval Office?
Well, first of all, I want to point out that I am told that I received the second honorary doctorate after independence from a Ukraine university. The first went to President Clinton. Mm-hmm. I'm told the second went to me, the Kiev Economic University. I championed Ukraine independence. I worked very closely with the Ukrainian American Credit Union movement. I advocated, went to the White House, went to Congress, and advocated funding for the Ukrainian Credit Union movement. Mm-hmm. So I am well versed about Ukraine. It was my privilege to spend time privately with President Kushner of Ukraine around 1995 and President Clinton in the Oval Office. I have watched this situation very closely. I sat next to Sandy Berger, the National Security Advisor, and I discussed with him over a 3-hour period, not only Ukraine, but Ireland, India, and Kosovo in particular. So I am somewhat well versed in the Ukrainian situation. I am a staunch admirer of the tenacity, strength of character, and resilience of the Ukrainian people. Mm-hmm. Having said that, perhaps it was unwise for the United States and Europe to push the envelope vis-a-vis Russia. We have to remember that during the last 900 or so years, Ukraine has only been detached from Russia for 30 years. Yes. Perhaps it was wise to stick to the Bucharest agreement or accords or understandings, let's call them. Namely that, as Sandy Berger and I discussed, Ukraine would be nuclear free, therefore not NATO, that Ukraine would not be part of the European Union. These assurances and understandings seem to have been regrettably put aside. And unfortunately, it would seem, based on what I understand, that shortly before the horrific invasion of Ukraine on the part of Russia, that Ukraine had struck a deal with the Germans involving large amounts of its erstwhile rare earth minerals and other things. These series of events, the seizing of 2,500 or 3,000 Orthodox churches and transferring them from Moscow to the sea in Istanbul, you can go through a litany of things that occurred that might have been unfortunate moves and exasperated individuals. I'm reminded of McGeorge Bundy, who was National Security Advisor and a North Shore neighbor of ours. I went to McGeorge Bundy's 45th wedding anniversary at his house. I remember McGeorge Bundy explaining to me, Christopher, the Soviets in Cuba was not about Miami, it was about the Mississippi River. One missile attacking the Mississippi River and 80% of America shuts down. So one has to look at this to some extent from the Russian standpoint. Missiles a few hundred miles from Moscow is not what one might say in New York, a kosher situation. The other situation I would say is that the far east of Russia, at any moment, which has huge Red Chinese, Communist Chinese investment, billions and billions of dollars more than Moscow is making in the East. At any moment, the east of Russia could be annexed by the Chinese at any moment. Therefore, at the end of this somewhat long but incomplete answer to your question, Russia is a natural ally for the United States. Is a natural ally in the long run.
Yeah.
And please, if I just may add one thing, please remember that in the paltry 10 or 12 or 14 billion dollars or so that Germany has contributed in arms, which is nothing, absolutely nothing in the scheme of things. Yet Germany and the other countries of Europe, daily, weekly, and annually, are giving far more money to Russia in terms of payments for other goods and services. And every single day, iron ore leaves Ukraine traveling to communist China. So let's put this into perspective. And mercifully, President Trump is, much to his credit, saying, is it worth another 200,000 lives for a situation that never, ever should have happened?
But this is a completely different approach from President Biden. And he insists that Russia is the enemy. Now Mr. Trump is saying the opposite. Who is right in this segment?
Look, I am a child of the Cold War. I visited Moscow in 1963. 1963, my father and brother and
during the Khrushchev era,
were the only three tourists, American tourists, in Moscow at Christmas 1963, at least according to the U.S. Embassy. Kennedy had just been assassinated in November, and in mid-December, we were in Moscow spending Christmas at the American Embassy. I understand the Cold War. I understand the mentality of the Cold War. I understand the world from which President Biden and many of his associates come from. But the concept that Moscow is going to invade Paris and Berlin and Madrid is far-fetched.
So it's not realistic. Right now, Mr. Hyland, we can see that United States and Europe is not in one position. And that is happening for the first time in 30 years. We can see, on the one hand, President Trump and Washington, and the other hand, Paris, Berlin, and also London together, speaking about the Ukraine issue and also the NATO issue. How do you see these kind of divisions in the relations with Balkans and all the open questions there are?
Underlying all of the noise that's transpiring right now, all the chatter and the breakup of NATO and whatnot, which is all categorically nonsense. Underneath all of that nonsense is the firm reality that the North Atlantic must be and will continue to be solid. But what is happening is the United States, again, brilliantly under the leadership of President Trump, is saying to Europe, the United States has spent in the trillions of dollars to defend you. Money taken from our economy, except, of course, the sale of weaponry, which is beneficial. Unfortunately, the sales of weapons are a beneficial economic. That aside, we have funded Europe's social welfare systems, advanced transportation systems, and 100 other programs that we are lacking in our own country. And President Trump has aptly said, and by the way, the head of NATO recently at the White House completely agreed with this. The president is simply saying it is time for you to pay your fair share. We have also, since the end of World War II, seen that every year the Germans, among others, but Germany in particular, comes to New York, they get inexpensive money, bring it back to Germany, give it to their mid-range companies, those companies flourish, and the comparable firms in America shut down. We give them trade advantages that the Europeans do not give us. So please, let's separate two things. One, NATO will survive stronger than ever because the NATO chief already admits that finally Europeans are paying their fair share.
Yep.
That's one thing. And secondarily, finally, the United States will have its fair share in the economic pie between the Euro-Atlantic world. I have an interesting personal perspective of this, because in the 1960s, I spent time with William W. Quinn, the Commander-in-Chief of the 7th Army. So much so that we would, on one of Hitler's former command trains, tour the American sector. So from a first-hand standpoint, I understood what America was doing to defend Europe. And I can remember once when we were heading towards Frankfurt railway station, the general outlined with the various salt and peppers on the table, the sort of Euro-Asian defensive situation. It's a massive story and requires a massive realignment. Germany is the third or fourth most powerful economy in the world and simply is not carrying its weight.
Do you see a perspective or a future for the European Union, Mr. Hyland?
I see a future that's rosy under one condition.
What condition?
That the European Union extend to the Balkan Six the same sense of respect, the same sense of inclusion, and the same sense of hope for a better future that the United States gave Europe after World War II. To be more specific, after Germany had masterminded the annihilation of millions of people in gas chambers, after Europe was in a complete horrific kerfuffle, that's a minor description, the United States at the end of World War II did not seek heavy-duty restitution, heavy-duty demands that would ruin the German and European economy. The United States, and indeed Winston Churchill said, I propose that there be a United States of Europe, one with France and one with Germany, living in harmony, with moral authority in Germany and moral authority in France. And therefore, through the cold board, piano, piano, bit by bit, the European Union was founded. But that same sense of graciousness, that same sense of respect that the United States and indeed Great Britain showed at the conclusion of World War II is not being demonstrated to the West Balkan Six. More specifically, if I may say, East Germany was admitted in a matter of 6 or 8 months to the European Union. It was an economy completely collapsed, a state as a failed complete state, and now we're in 30 years, 18, 19, 20, 30 years of discussions as to whether the West Balkan Six will be admitted. It's morally bankrupt. There's no future for Europe if Europe treats the West Balkan Six any way differently than the United States treated Europe, and that is to treat them with respect and as brothers and sisters.
Is the United States under President Trump changing towards the Balkans, the open issues, the Bosnia issue, the Kosovo-Serbian or the Albanian-Serbian question, open question? Are the Balkan people or the people living here, Albanians, Serbians, Macedonians, Montenegrins, and Bosniaks, will have to make open questions about Mr. Trump and the actions towards the soil, this land?
I think that if you observe the history of President Trump, you will know that he puts many things on the table, many ideas. He exudes attitudes in different directions. And after those attitudes are floated, and after they are examined, a result occurs. I give you the Abraham Accords in the Middle East. Everybody attacked him. This was a change of American policy. There was no way that this could happen. He made pronouncements in this direction and that direction. He banned certain groups from entering the country. And then isn't it interesting, thereafter, all of a sudden, some of the world from which that ban applied, all of a sudden made the Abraham Accords. So I think that in the long run, there will be a far better Balkan situation in the future. If I may quite...
Can we talk specifically about Kosovo-Serbia relations?
Sure.
What is to be expected, since in the first mandate of President Trump, there were open discussion about the border change, the land swaps that were opposed by the many political actors here and also abroad in the European Union. Can we expect such ideas to be materialized in Balkans, in the Kosovo-Serbia issue?
I do not know what President Trump's plan is and how he will continue to approach the Balkan situation. But I do know this, that if President Trump were in Prime Minister Kurti's shoes, he would do nothing differently than what Prime Minister Kurti is doing for Kosovo today.
Are you sure?
I am 100% sure. There is no President Trump, no version of President Trump that would ever announce to the American people that surrounding the District of Columbia, there would be a group of Norwegian Lutheran-only townships connected to Norway. It would never happen. It would never, ever, ever happen. Because President Trump would say, as Albin Kurti has brilliantly said, the Constitution of Kosovo binds us together, protects us under the law, and indeed the recent election in Kosovo, during which the Serb minority participated for the first time in a few years at relatively decent levels, and there's a good Serbian list for the forthcoming parliament. That is testimony to the Constitution of Kosovo, which is the finest, most liberal and inclusive constitution ever written in the history of constitutions. It is proof positive that inclusion and protection under the law is the way to go, not ethnic divide. To divide Kosovo and create a Lebanon is criminal.
Yeah, clear, but the position of the United States, both the Democrats and the Republicans, was for Kosovo to recognize the Brussels and the Ohrid Agreement, which is calling for the establishing of the association of the Serb majority municipalities here in Kosovo, which Mr. Kurti did not do that, and this
much
was
to his credit.
I don't know if he's making good or not.
Much to his credit that he has not accepted that.
Yeah,
that is a good thing.
Do you think that
is absolutely the only way Kurti can proceed?
Well, a close guy to the President Trump, Mr. Richard Grenell, he has been vocal and very harsh towards Kurti. He has accused Kurti of ruining the Kosovo and American relations. Now, do we have to believe Mr. Grenell? What is he saying? And he has been very vocal, and he has spoke a lot against Mr.
First
Kurti.
of all, I think Ambassador Grenell is a brilliant thinker. He is immensely smart.
Yeah.
He is a person of great wisdom. And whatever Ambassador Grenell might be saying now, in my personal opinion, at the end of the day, Kurti and others will once again be brought to the White House as brilliant, then quite young, Grenell was able to achieve between Serbs and Kosovans. But in this scenario, as I see it, Kurti will be coming to the table at the White House and will in future be interacting with Grenell and with President Trump based on there being a whole Kosovo, not divided, indivisible.
Yep.
And we have to recall that the United States of America has in some states, individual states, 2,000 and 3,000 and 4,000 different types of communities. We have several hundred languages that Americans speak. It would be a Tower of Babel to divide America according to the ASEM point of view. And we must recall that Kosovo is only 8 or 9 times the size of New York City.
Yeah.
And I very much agree, and I would like Ambassador Grenell, for whom I have great respect, and I would very much like President Trump, for whom I have enormous respect. I voted for him 3 times.
You voted for Mr. Trump?
I voted for President Trump 3 times. President Trump and I have spoken a couple of times, and at an event he described me as an outstanding American, for which I am very grateful. But I believe in the fullness of time, they will see that constitutionality in this case and the functioning of the Kosovo Constitution and the strength of character to defend against ASEM is the ultimate correct direction to go in. I want to add that recently I had a discussion with General Clark, face-to-face discussion with General Clark. And General Clark said, it's a very simple thing, Christopher. There are 10 or 20 advanced base camps that Serbia has adjacent to the Kosovo frontier. If you give 6 or 8 or 10 or 5, whatever it is, Serb-controlled municipalities with direct association to Serbia, you are simply creating military camps, de facto military camps within Kosovo. It is a no-go.
It is a no-go.
Period. It will be no matter what anybody is saying right now. And that's why I always want to point out that President Trump is brilliant. He's a brilliant New Yorker. I'm a New Yorker. You say many things, but in the end, you get to what is the fair thing. You get to the Abraham Accords. You get to ceasefires. You achieve that which is benign and good.
As I can understand from your point of view, Mr. Hyland, you're expecting a new deal in the White House, a new deal between Kosovo and Serbia.
I'm expecting that there will be a new deal. I think that 1 million people demonstrated yesterday or the day before in Serbia.
Yeah.
I think that sadly, and Serbian culture is a great culture. I would love one day, for instance, to visit the great Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox Cathedral in Belgrade, which is a beautiful building. I have great respect for Serbian culture. But I firmly believe that the citizens of Serbia want a brighter future, one that is not marked by persistent and constant corruption. And I believe that at the end of the day, if I may humbly say, that all the lithium in the world should not be set against the Kosovo Constitution to destroy an extension of the U.S. Constitution. All the lithium in the world. And incidentally, it is interesting that most of the jurisdictions in Europe do not want to increase their lithium production because of the damage it does to the natural water table. But yet, the government in Serbia is more than happy to do that to what is a very small country and very dangerous for its future.
Mr. Hyland, in the political scene here in Kosovo, and not only in the political scene, there is fear that with Mr. Grenell role, and now the son of the President Trump, Donald Trump Jr., was visiting Serbia, and he's having close relationship with President Vučić. There are fears here in Kosovo that the new administration will be closer to Serbia than is to Kosovo. Are those fears realistic towards the situation?
I think what is realistic, that American businesses, American business persons, American political leaders, diplomats, and others will visit Albania, such as members of the Trump family have done. I understand that Jared Kushner is interested in resort development in Albania.
Yeah.
I understand that he or some other member of the family might be interested in building a new hotel where once was the China embassy.
Yeah.
I understand that there are Americans showing interest in business in Serbia, business in Albania, and also Americans who have interest in business here. I know of New Yorkers who employ a few hundred people here doing various types of business in Kosovo. So I would not judge the political landscape based on who's visiting who to do business. But what I would take from that is that it is time to do business. Because remember, in the first Trump administration, the deal that they tried and got everybody to sign, but was mostly not implemented, was about doing business. Because in the end, commerce is what generates connections between people. There are cultural, there's tourism, there's many, many things. But you cannot underestimate the importance of building strong economic ties that are balanced and reasonable. And clearly Serbia has been able to balance Europe against the Balkans,
but they
to their advantage.
Yeah, but they do maintain the close relationship with Russia, and Russia was a key factor destabilizing the region and the Balkans.
The Serbs maintain relationships with the United States. They just signed an oil deal with the United States. They maintain relationships with the EU. They maintain relationships with China, Russia. And in fact, between you and me, with, in my personal opinion, the acquiescence and the agreement of the EU, Serbia sustains the problem with Kosovo because as long as there's a problem with Kosovo, Germany and other countries in Europe who are taking over most of the Serbian economy are not regulated by EU laws governing business and other matters. This is extremely important. In other words, Serbia serves to keep the Western Balkans at bay for Europe.
Once again, how do you see the perspective and the role of Mr. Grenell towards the question and reestablishing, if I can say, reestablishing the relationship with Mr. Kurti? Do you think that Grenell and Kurti could work together? Do you think that Mr. Kurti could work with the President Trump administration, having in mind that in the first mandate he had problems, he had open problems, and he did not went to the White House for the signing of the economic agreement, which was produced, if I can say so, by Mr. Grenell.
There's a wonderful article written by the Irish Voice. It's the newspaper of record with the Irish Echo in America. And the title of it is The Unsung Hero of the Irish Peace Process. And it's about me. And it talks about all of the various things that I did that led to the Irish Forum meeting in which then candidate Clinton was asked pointed questions about the future of American policy towards Great Britain. During that period of time in which I worked with ethnic communities, the Irish community, it was made clear to me that Senator Kennedy wanted the status quo in Northern Ireland, that Speaker Foley wanted the status quo in Northern Ireland, that this one didn't like this one would never speak to this one, they would never do this, they would never change, it's impossible. And everybody bought into that point of view, except for one thing. Once you began chipping at it, it all fell apart. All the backs up against the wall, all the false sense of pride collapsed over about a year or two period. I discussed this also with Sandy Berger. The point of my story is that in the fullness of time, three personalities, Trump, Grinnell, and Curti, who are strong, headstrong in some ways, justifiably so, those three personalities will find a way to accommodation. And I very much hope that this interview, will be listened to by Ambassador Grinnell, who again I say I admire. But remember one thing, the American Constitution, when it was first signed, allowed few people to vote, and many residents of our former colonies were considered inhuman. It took us 600,000 people dying in the Civil War to fits and start lead towards greater equity. The Kosovo Constitution begins at the gate, first out of the gate. It is totally inclusive.
So you're saying that it demands sacrifice for the process, but you're being very optimistic, Mr. Hyland, about the relations between Grinnell and Mr. Curti. We'll see.
Could I just insert one other thing? When I first began working with Jim Gemma, and when I first began introducing leaders of the Kosovan and Albanian community to key people in the Clinton campaign, including Hillary Clinton, George Stephanopoulos, and others, there was complete blockage, total blockage. It was vinegar and oil. There would be no relationship. There would be nothing. Again, the Irish story, the early Kosovo story, this too will change. There is hope.
Hopefully. I will ask you another question about some fears here in Kosovo. I want to address the possible United States troop withdrawal from Kosovo, as Bild, the German newspaper, reported that Washington is considering withdrawing its troops from Kosovo. Do you think such a move is likely, and how would it impact the security situation in Kosovo?
Well, first of all, whether it is likely or not, I am not sure. But the United States does have persistently a history of withdrawal. Withdrawal Vietnam, withdrawal Afghanistan, withdrawal Iraq, etc., etc. I, however, believe that there will be no withdrawal of American troops from Kosovo. Absolutely none. My personal opinion, there will be no withdrawal, and to withdraw troops from Kosovo at this point would be utter folly.
I want to change the subject, Mr. Hyland, speaking about the special court, which is founded by Kosovo, and the special court is actually in Hague, in Netherlands. How do you see the perspective of special court and the role of ex-KLA commanders? Some of them, they have been prime ministers, presidents, as Mr. Thaci and Mr. Veseli, and also Mr. Krasniqi and Selimi and the others. How do you see the process? Could you see a light in the end of the tunnel for ending the process, the judicial process, or how do you see the new approach of United States towards the special courts?
I studied with Kirsta Stendel at Harvard Divinity School. I studied New Testament. Kirsta Stendhal believed in the commonality of all humanity. He believed in forgiveness. He believed in trying to clearly set moral standards while at the same time understanding that one must move on into history. I very much admired Martin Luther King, who when I was a boy said to me, "Look evil in the eye and give it no succor." And finally, I fully admired Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And I was lucky enough to write a piece that then appeared in a South African newspaper. And I hope that text contributed to an idea or an attitude that was one of 5,000 bits of input that led Desmond Tutu courageously to chair a reconciliation board and committee in South Africa.
Yeah.
And the basic gist of that reconciliation board was not to condone acts of violence and unfortunate experiences that occurred during the horrible years of South Africans' move towards independence and freedom. But what it did was to say that if we can accept responsibility, if we can say, yes, we engaged in unfortunate scenarios, let us then go forward into the future. And somehow, some way, it is my personal opinion, and this is not condoning the actions of Serbs or Kosovans or whoever it might be, but I'm beginning to feel that we should look at this situation as time served before trial, during trial, and any time served after trial of all individuals, whether they're from Bosnia and Herzegovina or Croatia or Kosovo or Serbia. That we have this reconciliation, that we don't forget, but we move forward, which is why I proposed a couple of years ago that the vacant, unfinished Serb church on the University of Pristina campus be a multi-ethnic, multi-religion peace and reconciliation monument, bringing all communities, whether it's Gypsies or Turks or Bosnians or all communities together in a physical space.
I mean, speaking about The Hague, do you think that the specialist court is seeking for justice? I also want to talk about the relationship between Mr. Trump, the President Trump. He was very harsh towards the prosecutor, Mr. Jack Smith, who was prosecuting the ex-KLA commanders and was involved directly to the specialist courts. I mean, specifically.
Well, specifically, the court is an extension of the Kosovo legal system. It is run substantially by non-residents of Kosovo. I am going to repeat what I said a moment ago. I think it is time that reconciliation be the mode at this point, and that perhaps that is where we need to move to, because these legal proceedings could continue for decades and sustain instability, and in sustaining instability, you will not have a single high-tech company invest in your country. It's a no-brainer to understand there's a point we need to move on. Like Churchill moved on, like Truman moved on after the war, and Germany today is a vibrant place because of that. And Kosovo needs to be the Switzerland of the Kosovo needs to be the Switzerland of the future, of the Balkans, of the Baltics. but it cannot be that as long as it is constantly wed to the past.
Yeah.
And if I may humbly also say that several hundred, if not a few thousand, Americans were starved to death on ships in New York Harbor. There's a huge monument there. The British conducted all kinds of horrific things. Hundreds, thousands of Northerners were starved to death in southern camps in our southern states. The war of, of liberation of civil war. But you need to now move to the future.
Do you see political figures here in Kosovo, in Pristina, and also in the other part in Belgrade that are interested and they are investing their potential towards the reconciliation between Kosovo and Serbia, between Albanians and Serbs?
I believe in his heart of hearts, Prime Minister Kurti's greatest wish would be that normalization. I am not convinced that the leadership in Belgrade feels the same because they make too much money. Billions and billions of dollars
from the status quo,
from the European Union to Serbia, from China, from Germany, from everywhere, because of the fear of Serb instability leading towards wall moves or whatever. And quite frankly, I'm hoping that a brilliant Trump sees through that and says, excuse me, we don't need to play that game against Kosovo in order to get your lithium mine. And by the way, there are 1 million people in the streets, many of whom are probably saying, it's enough already, let's move forward. And I might also say that it is now, there's so many unhappy things that happened in the 90s, but there are wonderful Serb historic sites, such as Dekane Monastery, and the site of the Great Battle of Kosovo, that I am sure that Serbs, rather that Kosovans, as they've done for monasteries over the centuries in protecting them and guarding them, and not only from a practical level would they be willing to welcome people to visit those sites, those individuals visit them now, but not enough of that tourist money is really going to the coffers of Kosovo.
Clearly. Mr. Hyland, you're close to Kosovar people for more than 30 years. A lot of, you know a lot of the political figures here. What is your opinion about ex-President Thaci, ex-Prime Minister Thaci? Do you see a perspective of coming back here in Kosovo and also being part of the political life here? How do you see the perspective?
Well, I'm not going to address any former or present political leader, heads of any party, or I'm not going to address what their future politics might or might not be, or speculate what they might be. I would find it very strange that if there was a truth and reconciliation scenario, I would personally find it odd if that did not bar certain people from political activity for 5 or 10 years if you go by other similar situations. My comment in that level or in that position is not directed against any individual, because my personal opinion is that attaining independence is a very difficult historic period. We had in America the Articles of Confederation, which no one wants to talk about. And there were states that passed some pretty awful laws. And so there was a lot of acrimony then. And there were problems in the first years of Kosovo independence. But everyone, Thaci and others, in various ways rose to the occasion to do the best that they could. But who might or might not be future political leaders, or what role they might or might not play, is beyond my purview.
His father passed away last night, so
that's a very sad thing. And I thought it showed great grace and great sense of humanity that the court allowed the former president to visit his father before he died. And I take that, in my opinion, which is why I strongly say this in this interview, I take that as an opening. That might be a gesture to say, you know, it's time. Time goes on. Death comes to all of us. We need to create a better future for future generations here. And if that is with the former president or not, that is up to the conciliation, terms of conciliation to determine.
I want to talk about the role of late President Rugova also. You had close relationship with President Rugova. How do you remember Mr. Rugova?
I remember him, as many people, first with the scarf, and two, smoking far too much. I remember Jim Gemma, the great Jim Gemma, who the Rugova family considered to be a co-founder of Kosovo, and I would like to speak about that Kosovo community, if you could, in a moment.
But I'm planning to speak about
I remember that Jim arranged for me to spend time with President Rugova in his suite at the Hilton Hotel in New York City. And people were surprised and didn't realize that I spoke French. And so in those days, Rugova spoke little or no English at all at that time.
No English.
That's right.
But he knew French.
Yes, he spoke. Il parlait français couramment, pas de problème. Et Rugova et moi, on a discuté ici et comme ça. It was from the moment we began speaking in between the puffs of cigarette and my trying to get away from the smoke, we spoke nonstop, and we spoke about everything. We spoke about freedom, we spoke about Serbia, Kosovo, what a constitution would look like, independence, Clinton, what should be done. I suggested that he prepare a paper that I could directly distribute to all the leadership of the Clinton campaign and to Clinton himself, which he did produce, and I still have a copy of, by the way. And so he and I got along very well. Another occasion, I think it was in the Bronx, Naim Tuce, the great Kosovo leader, has a photograph of me holding Rugova's arm up in the air, and I think he was in front of the United Nations when I spoke. There were a number of times that I encountered him, but as is often the case, like the conversation we're having between us, he and I had a similar non-stop conversation in French, and I admired him. I admired him because he was Kosovo. He stood for Kosovo. He wanted Kosovo independence, but yet he was a person who wanted desperately to do it with as peacefully as possible, with as little ruin as possible. And so I admired him for it, and it helped instigate even more my standing up for the Kosovo for the Kosovo narrative. Because if I may add, Father McSorley, my teacher of War and Peace at Georgetown, he took me aside one day and he said, Christopher, one day you will have to make a choice to do the right thing or do what is the expedient thing. In the case of Kosovo, I did the right thing, and I don't regret it. It drove Warren Christopher crazy. They were unhappy, but it was the right thing. And I'm here today, old enough and lived long enough to celebrate that with you.
Well, Rugova was an atypical politician. He was totally different to the other politicians. In that time, in the 90s, and
yes, he was an intellectual. What I think of as a Bostonian, sort of a Paris intellectual. My view of this world of Paris intellectuals. But many people don't realize that he was an
similar
expert.
to the path of Havel and other intellectuals that
like
were part.
Exactly. But many folks don't realize that he was a great student of beauty. The intellectual aspects of beauty in art and architecture.
Aesthetic.
He was into the world of aesthetics. So as robust as he was, he understood maybe that there was truth in art. He also loved the land. I'm very happy Yuki Rugova this Christmas gave me 2 rocks from his father's collection, which I have proudly in my table in my living room.
I want to talk about the Albanian diaspora in the United States. not only Jim Jima, but Jim Jima has made a lot of efforts and is still doing efforts for Kosovo. Mr. Bayraktari also, the other generations. How do you see the role of Albanian diaspora in the United States, and what is your connection towards them, Mr.
Well, Harry and Jim and the Batici brothers and Bruno and dozens of others, I often think of it as the restaurant revolution, because in those days in America was the beginning of the real emergence of the Albanian Kosovan community as a strong economic unit.
Yep.
And many of them owned restaurants.
The restaurant connection.
Restaurants. They own restaurants. They own restaurants in Chicago. Maybe there was a first restaurant opened with Mehmet in Texas, let's say, and someone in Washington. These restaurants, like Anthony Athenas' restaurant,
the legendary.
These restaurants became political centers. I can remember Bruno's restaurant in New York, not only a political center, but a relief center. Half the restaurant was devoted
Bruno Telima,
to dispersing materials. And people like Naim Tuche and others were there as young people. Vibi Barami was there as a young person. They were all working very hard. This is an example that speaks to the important realization that the smallest community, then maybe a couple of 100,000 people, with no representative in Congress, with no lobbyist to speak of, although, yes, I forgive, yes, there was a lobbyist, and with people like Joe DiGuardio, who was supporting, and Senator Dole and whatnot. But that community really gave birth to the Republic of Kosovo. Yes, domestically in Kosovo, there was the great leadership, thousands of people that rose to the occasion, sacrificed for freedom. But if the United States did not back that up, there would be no free Kosovo. And that occurred because of the people like the Badici brothers and Bruno and Jim Gemma. But Jim Gemma, you cannot underestimate Jim Gemma.
No.
Jim Gemma dispensed millions of dollars of his own money for a cause, and Jim never derived a single income as a result of that. That was pure altruistic civic society at its most important. And I, for instance, gave a dinner party for Hillary Clinton with Alice Walton of Sam Walton's son. And by the way, Mrs. Walton cooked a great lunch, I might add. But I introduced Hillary to everyone. I introduced Jim to the leadership of the community. And this was on several occasions. And eventually, the President of the United States in his book, My Life, at the top of the page, the president refers to the Albanian community. And then in the next paragraph, he says, what Christopher Hyland did substantially contributed to my winning the general election and giving unprecedented access to ethnic communities to the White House. It was that access that built in the Clinton years that led to Clinton putting his foot down and rallying NATO leadership to order General Clark to bomb Belgrade.
To bomb Belgrade. Do we still have friends in the United States, Mr. Hyland? A lot of politicians, they're not living anymore, as Senator Dolan, and of course the other ones. How do you see the connection between the now Kosovo state and the United States? Do we need to refresh our connections? Do we still have friends? And in the United States, how do you see the perspective?
Recently, in New Jersey, I spoke with Ambassador Walker, Prime Minister Curti, and myself, the three of us spoke to, I would say, 600 Albanian Americans. Some of them might have been from North Macedonia, some from Kosovo, some from Albania. And I know when I stood up and spoke, I had everybody hip, hip, hooraying for Prime Minister Kurti and for Kosovo. And therefore, at that moment, in that community, as in other Albanian communities in America, there is very strong support. What is lacking are the same types of leaders as Jim Gemma. This type of leadership is lacking in the community. It does not exist. And my personal opinion, I strongly feel that lack of a Kosovo caucus in the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives is a seriously bad mistake. I can tell you, from an historic standpoint, it could have disastrous consequences. Yeah. So, because, for instance, you mentioned that emanating from Germany is a rumor that the Americans might be withdrawn from Kosovo. Boy, a Kosovo caucus would be all over that in 5 seconds. They would be in touch with this congressman and that congressman. When I contacted a person who I firmly believe will be president of the United States in 8 years at least, and I said, would you form such a caucus? He came back to me and said, it seems that the Kosovans don't want a caucus.
Don't want a caucus.
They don't want a caucus. They don't want to be represented. And so why would anybody do it? Because, this is a major problem. Yeah. And when a senior executive tells me, Christopher, you told me about Kosovo, and I asked my person who consults with me when we want to expand or do a home office in, I don't know, Bangkok or here and there. He said, it's the strangest thing. I never received a report back from this consultancy firm about a country that doesn't want to be a country. This is the first time I've ever heard this. So a second thing is, first you need a caucus, and a second thing is, the narrative of Kosovo as a temporary country must end immediately. And the promotion of this...
This is the message towards the politicians here.
This also is the message towards the politicians here, the politicians in Albania, in North Macedonia, in Montenegro.
And everywhere.
And everywhere, it needs to stop. Because one of the reasons that certain EU operatives are able to undermine the Kosovo narrative is exactly this. And they are able to actually have clips, I'm told, of audio-visual manifestations, which they show people. And indeed, on my first visit here, I was told by several people how this was a temporary country. Now, as long as you promote that, you actually give Germany and Europe a gift. Because the last thing Germany wants is 2, 3, or 4 Albanian votes in the Council of Europe. Because Germany and France have failed to create an inner and outer voting tier in Europe. Outer being less powerful. Yep. Now, little Malta, for which many years I was an honorary consul in the United States, Joseph Muscat came close to being president of Europe. That did not lots of people didn't like that. And little Malta has the same vote as Germany, France, Spain, or Poland. So I believe in my heart of hearts that if Fan Noli were sitting here right now, the brilliant Harvard-educated Fan Noli, he would nudge me and he'd say, Christopher, I remember you when you were a kid. Keep on going. What you're saying is 100% correct. Yeah. I am so happy to learn that 60 years later, there are 2, 3, or 4 Albanian votes in Europe, not 1. Sorry.
Which is a true story that I don't know if the people, the viewers that are watching us, they know, but you have had the connection, the direct connections with Fan Noli, and also with Konica.
No, not
You
Konica.
have heard
No,
about
not Konica. No.
Not Konica.
No, I never met Konica.
You never met?
No,
Okay.
I never ever
Okay.
said I met Konica.
Okay.
The only two early Albanians leaders that I met was Fanoli.
Okay.
And Anthony Athenas.
Anthony Athenas,
Yeah,
okay.
Konica would have been dead long ago.
Yeah.
No, I had nothing. I became aware of Konica
you became
because
aware,
also
okay.
remember Konica went to Harvard University, and so that world, the Harvard world, is a very dominant aspect of the culture I come from.
Yeah.
And no, Anthony Athenas had a restaurant 1.5 miles from my parents' house.
Yeah.
It was the only restaurant that you could go to. And my dad and Anthony Athenas went to Europe with John Volpe to promote New England commerce. They were all friends, and Archbishop Noli would be at the restaurant. And I know based on what my parents told me that I met Fanoli when I was an infant the first time, but I come to recognize and really remember him when I'm 9 or 8 or 9 or 10 years old. And he was the old man who was there. My dad did some work for the cathedral, pro bono work for the cathedral in South Boston. So I had this connection. And oftentimes when I'm thinking during my conversation right now, I'm trying to evoke what I think Fanoli would have done. Not that you can,
but it's very interesting.
I really do try to, because I remember him. He was someone so dedicated to a inclusive, liberal, progressive, interesting future for Albania.
Mr. Hyland, it was a pleasure having you here during this interview, and hopefully we will meet again. As I understood, you will have 2 opportunities to discuss with the students, with Kosovo students.
Yes,
So
I will be speaking at the Rochester Institute of Technology. They have a peace center there, a brilliant peace center, and I will be speaking at the University of Business and Technology, where there is a Hyland Center for Global Studies, and this will be an event connected to that. And I'm very proud of the fact that the Rochester Institute of Technology emanates from the American Athenaeum movement, which are private libraries, and the private library in Rochester became a university. And I'm very proud of my association with Edmund Harishi, who I think is a visionary when it comes to education in Kosovo. I felt I was very much at home when I went into a class at UBT and they were playing with robots that everybody had constructed, because I remember many years ago going to MIT and seeing robots for the first time somehow. So I was there, and I'm happy to be here. And I thank you very much for interviewing me, and thank you for your poignant questions, and I hope they set some thought in place for individuals who view them not only here, but hopefully elsewhere. Who knows, maybe Donald Trump or Ambassador Brunel or Prime Minister Albin Kurti.
Yeah, and I wanna thank you for your work and your dedications towards the Kosovo people.
I appreciate it.
In the name of the viewers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.